So what I wanted to say is that all of these experiences, starting with my mother's diary, were all points of my life culminating forward, culminating in my being able to write this book, which I had hoped would go to people, my own people, but really one day, I will never forget this. I was Joe was getting, his driver was picking him up to go to work, and I had to go to the vicinity in New York City. So I said, okay, Joey, I'm gonna go down with you. And I was sitting in the car talking to Joe about some of the questions I had about immigration. And the driver, who was Pakistani, turned around and said, Hadassah, please, when your book comes out, I want my children to read what you've said about immigration. And I was so touched when he said that. Another time, a mailman in Riverdale who was delivering packages, and he was en route to our building. And he said, Hadassah, I just ordered your video, which I narrated on the book. And he said, I never knew any of this history. I never knew any of this. So thank you. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get the story out. This is not a story, it's our history. And at the same time, we have new history emblazoned, and we have to be very proud and forceful. And that's why Nishmat has been very special in education and in really with immigrants, as we all know.
That is true. That is true. Now, the children of survivors have other burdens besides bearing testimony. You mentioned you were living in the name of all those who didn't get to live, as those children that didn't get to be born. Therefore, your life had to be meaningful. Would you say that has been a driving force in your life?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I felt that since childhood. As a matter of fact, when we lived in Gardner, Massachusetts, a small New England town near the New Hampshire border, where no one knew Yiddish, and it was a small Jewish community. And I will never forget how so many lessons I learned, so many people I saw. And we need to always understand, and that's what I realized from my childhood, being the daughter of a rabbi, and that we are the public relations to our community, to the world, about being Jewish. We have to always represent in such a way that we receive praise for ourselves and our community. And that's not always easy for everyone, but is a critical lesson.
You know, what you mentioned brings to mind something I wanted to ask you later on. You mentioned that you have suffered from gossip when you divorced. Later on, you were also falsely accused of being a lobbyist. And then I thought also about what you were saying about the challenges of being watched all the time. First, as the rabbi's daughter, then as a political spouse. This must have been very difficult for you because such roles entail a lack of privacy. And you're right that you are a very private person. How did you handle that conflict?
I must say, Baruch Hashem, that I didn't suffer from that. There were times I got frustrated, but I didn't suffer. And I said to Joe, you know, Joey, isn't it amazing going through the national campaigns, witnessing things on that level? We were fine. We were able, we had each other, we have our family. So when we could, we got together I did not suffer. Nothing simple, easy. Look, there are people today, as we know, who take on public life, who take on leadership responsibilities and handle in a very different way. I know from when Joe and I first got married, and I said something, we were talking, having a conversation in our kitchen or whatever. And Joey said to me, well, Hadassah, just to tell you that if you ever gave that answer or that opinion, you'd get on the front page of the Hartford Courant. I just looked at him and I realized this is a different ball game. So, but that's been defied by many people recently, and people defy it vis-a-vis relationships, vis-a-vis children. I've maintained my privacy, and I've learned to not answer questions. And I've learned to be very honest. I'm sorry, I'm not interested in talking about that or whatever. And if people don't like it, I remember the first one of the first little gatherings we had was a bunch of journalists in Georgetown, where we lived for a bit. And I'll never forget walking in, and there were some journalists around, and one of them was around me and said, you know, you are going to have to learn to not say too this. And I hadn't said anything, not to say too much. It's a tough town. People pick you up all the time. So I just looked at this person. I said, oh, thank you so much. And that was it. But that's how I started that time. And it's really true, because people pick, and today with this media, the Twitters, and look, you know, you have presidents putting messages out all day. So you have to watch your step, and you have to be grown up about it and differentiate between what's private. I remember a reporter at one of my events in New Hampshire, and she happened to be, I was alone at the event. You know, we did them separately all over the place when we weren't together. And she looked at me and said, well, yesterday was Tisha B'Av. Did you eat? I couldn't believe this was the question in the middle of, I said, well, that's really a religion. It relates to religion and commitment. I said, you know, I don't choose to answer questions like that because they hurt people one way or another. So thanks. Let's go on to another question. I'll never forget that. And of course it was, and that was the time that another Jewish sponsor and, you know, person who was there asked me sort of off the key question about Israel. That was, you know, but that's how it is. And these days, more so. So you do the best you can, stay strong and stay straight and honest.
That's good advice. Going back to how we started about the Holocaust, your father said that it would take 1,000 years for people to understand the Holocaust. Your mother went through incredible hardship during the Holocaust, and she was not able to write about it, as you told us a little while ago. Your father's experiences were also very challenging, and he was able to write, unlike your mother. And I guess this shows important differences in their personalities.
Absolutely.
How did this impact your life?
Well, these were two people, my father and my mother, who met each other after the war. My aunt Rojanani, my uncle Moshe Bachi, told my mother that the pharmacist from Rachov in the Carpathian Mountains in Czechoslovakia, where they were from, had a man's name that he thought might be of interest to my mother. Well, my mother wasn't going to go. She asked her sister, Rojanani, to go. Rojanani went and came back and said, he's a decent man. I like him. They met, and then they decided to marry and have a child, obviously, right away. But these were two people who met and loved each other, but they wouldn't have otherwise met necessarily. That was a lot that went on during the war. And after the war, people came together because they came together. They felt close, like, family. So look, I chose not to write anymore about weaknesses. And I just remember the screaming nightmares when I was a little girl. I heard them when I was in my bed, and she had those in the first few years of my growth, and I remember that. And it had affected her. Her whole life had been turned asunder. And, I used to hear the stories, when I was in my town, everyone, and then I would hear it from other people, everyone, Eluka was beautiful. She was gorgeous. They always said that to me. I thought, oh my God, I must be ugly. Because, I was joking. But she was just gorgeous. And my father was intellectual, and, he had his sermons, and he was at his desk with his tape recorder to try to get his English pronunciations better. So for hours at night, I would hear him at his tape recorder practicing his English. My mother knew 11 languages, and she couldn't believe, she never saw a language as difficult to spell. She said the spelling is impossible. And so, she learned more spelling when she went to the women's club that they insisted she become part of. Look, we survivors, children of people from the Shoah, know ourselves. Each child and parent are different. I remember a cousin of mine, she had survived with my mother at the same time in Auschwitz. And I will never forget being at her house in New Jersey, and the kids were eating breakfast, and someone didn't finish their food. And she said, in Auschwitz, we had no food, we would eat it. And I had never heard that expressed at the table. And I remember it to this day. And I was a little kid. So everything affects you. My dear friend, Mindy Wiesel, who's an artist who made Aliyah, we talk about it. She was able to express some of this background in her art. Some of us don't have that vehicle. So we have to write and do other things. So we're all different people. That's why we need to read and write and talk together.
And as a child of survivors, it must be very difficult for you to see in the media and in the internet the most recent outburst of anti-Semitism in the world, even in America. Some say anti-Semitism is a virus that mutates constantly and will never go away. Do you think there's a way to prevent and to fight anti-Semitism?
If anyone in the world had the absolute answer to that question, we would put them on the highest mountaintop and listen to every word they had to say. These words, these sentences, these things that we read that relate to us, modern anti-Semitic words, languages, threats, obviously impact us as immigrants, as Holocaust survivors. It's shocking because you say to yourself, oh my God, what's going on? This can't be happening again. And then those of us who have read what preceded all the horrible events, it was the language, it was the words. It's scary. At the same time, we are in the United States of America, and for the most part, and you hear President Biden's words, whether someone believes in him or votes for him, you have to accept the honesty, integrity of what he's saying about not speaking this way in public. It's not that these voices weren't underneath for a long time. as I said, in 2000, there was no anti-Semitic reference. People used to ask us, did you feel or hear or see anything? And when I would answer to Jews and say, no, nothing. As a matter of fact, in the Midwest, at areas when I was at rallies, there were people, I had no idea if they were Republican, Democrat, Independent, or nothing. They came up to me and said, we really like you. Your husband is a religious, an honest religious man. We like him. I was so touched with that articulation. So what can we do? We can do everything and still not necessarily eradicate everything that's out there. But at the same time, I always say, as I speak now in Zooms, and that one of our big dreams as Jews is Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. And no matter how big it seems to repair this huge globe, we are committed to that task. And what can I say? Do we really know if, I guess the most frustrating thing, and I think this sometimes when in tefillot, I think to myself, you know, the whole story about the Jews talking to Hashem, arguing with him. I say to myself, Hashem, listen to the words that we praise you, how we praise you. And if we are Bachar Banu, if we're a chosen people, listen to us. And you know, you always, there's nothing to say. We have to stay, and some people like Rabbanit Henkin is the most incredible person with her strength, with what she has endured. She is truly a leader for us all.
You say in 2000, you felt no expression of anti-Semitism at all. What about 2004?
No, not in 2004.
Also not.
No. Now, can I say to you that the same thing would happen today? I don't hear that outside. I don't see that outside. But I was amazed going around the country with Joe. And it was just amazing. And walking to and from hotels, sometimes to local shows where people's houses opened, where they were having a wedding reception for children, relatives, and they came out and some of them said Shabbat Shalom. And we were deeply touched because it was real. And we, you know, I'll never forget, my father told me this story. Look, he had studied law at Charles University, but he wasn't about to come to this country and start that over again in order to practice law in the States. So he had also been, he had smicha. He started at 5 years old, you know, the whole old-fashioned way. And there he was, the old-fashioned father who knew what he thought was important and what you were supposed to do. And so when he came to this country, we all came, we ended up going to Gardner, Massachusetts, where he took a synagogue. And there was no such thing as Orthodox, conservative, Orthodox, forget it, conservative or reform. Everyone went to one shul in the area. And I'll never forget how there was a minister on the radio, and my father became the president of the Ministerial Association at a later time. And he heard this minister before he was in that position. And he said, some of what he's saying sounds like it touches onto anti-Semitic language. He went to see the Reverend. He told him that. And the Reverend never did that again. He apologized, and my husband maintained a good relationship with him. So it's, I didn't have any anti-Semitic anything. Now, I know there were two boys who grew up in Gardner who actually, I cite them in the foreword of the book. And the irony is that my parents had died since it all happened, that one of them was from Lubavitch. He became Lubavitch. And the other one did too. My father would have been shocked. And the first one was from a family that was totally irreligious. The grandfather was buried in the Christian cemetery. And here's this boy who became religious. And the other one had a little more traditional family. And I write what they said about my parents. And Louis Avi, I still have to remember to call him by his new name. Avi said when he was with my parents, he said, I didn't know what it was, but there was something different. They were coming from another place, another kind of person. He said, I didn't know I was searching for Hashem at that time. So it greatly touched me. And that was out of Gardner.
You know, throughout your memoirs, I was fascinated to read about two apparently conflicting trends in your life. On one hand, as an immigrant, all you wanted was to blend in, to have a perfect English, to be totally and fully American. On the other hand, it seems as if fate would constantly put you on the fringe, on the outside. First, as the only observant home in a small town in New England, then as the spouse of a Jewish Orthodox senator, and finally as wife and partner of the first ever Jewish and Orthodox candidate for vice presidency. So on one hand, you wrote, and I quote you, when you are an immigrant and the daughter of survivors, the last thing you normally do is stand before a group of strangers and call attention to your differences. Most of us spend a lifetime trying to fit in. Then when you are in the political arena, you say, some people may have viewed us as political oddballs. And then you write about on the campaign in 2000, Gore said he wanted me to talk about my background in my introductory remarks, since my stories seem to embody the American dream. Could you please talk to us about these two conflicting trends, blending in and standing out?
Well, I think that's definitely an immigrant's difficulty and goal. On the one hand, you're different the minute you walk in with a different language. Mm-hmm. I remember going to kindergarten the first day in Gardner, and there was a basket over my head, which was filled for kids that had behaved with candies and trucks and dolls. And I was able to reach up and get something. I remember I get a little doll. I was shocked that that's what happened in America. And I came home and my mommy in Yiddish said, you know, how did it go? Hadassah. And I looked at her, I said, Mommy, no more Yiddish, only English. So she couldn't do anything but say, okay. In the meantime, I had to have braids or a ponytail. And then she didn't understand why I wanted slacks, so I have to have a skirt. She said, oh, you should have a skirt. But so there are always those kind of differences. The European meals, I'm going to say, oh yeah, another Amerikanische meal. The peanut, they get peanut butter for lunches, and I'd have to bring stuff that was a little different for lunch. And, those are differences that every immigrant, it could be Spanish, it could be Chinese, it could, and from anywhere, feels and goes through. And that's why it's so difficult to make the adjustments for you and your family. And here, your parents don't know what your friends are saying if they speak quickly. I talked about that in my chapter on immigration, because we have to be mindful that our parents don't really get to know our friends unless you let them talk to them and with them. And I was very mindful of that at an early age. And unlike New York, when you're in New York, there are a lot of immigrants. There are a lot of people from some of the same towns your parents are from. And you go to Shoah gatherings. I didn't do any of that. So it was at the same time, so I always had those differences in me. And I was proud of being Jewish. And my friend across the street, Patty Gallant, was Catholic home. And she used to come over and say, oh, can I be the Shabbos? And she didn't know the next word, going in the house. And she was so cute. And, that's the task. But then the political part, Joe, from the start, we were observing Shabbat. We were never not going to. And then when the vice presidential, and I'll never forget Al Gore saying, he sort of was joking and saying, I'm watching your husband. And I think what I should do is be mindful of everything, in particular on Saturday, and then I'll let him be mindful of everything for me, so I'm freer on Sunday. So that was a joke. Or my mother, who never hung they hung their clothes out, at that time. You didn't use dryers. And she never hung her clothes out on Sunday. And so the neighbor never hung it out on Saturday. And they weren't Jewish. They didn't know anything. So I think there's a certain honesty, integrity. People believe you and listen to you when you speak honestly. And you can always disagree, or you can be different, but be a decent, straight individual who can express yourself to people who know nothing about you whatsoever. And that was how we were raised, and no choice for the place that we were raised in.
Yes, you mentioned the European contrast with the American contrast. I also noticed it in some of the things that you write in the book. For example, you write about the American validation of the pursuit of happiness. And at the same time, you express the European acceptance that life is hard and not always happy. And that's the way it is. And you have in you, I think it enriches your personality, that you have these two influences within you.
Well, thank you. It's always been important to me. And I think in a way, it's been my balancing scale. And we're all like that. Sometimes life becomes very difficult. And, of course you react to it, but you have to pull yourself out a bit. It was interesting. Our baby, who is not a baby anymore, has 5 boys, and she made Aliyah. So she lives in Israel and studied with Rabbi Hankin. And she was just sending me some tapes that was a whole Haredi group, and they made some reference to where my mother was from, the Rachov Rebbe, and just she had been listening to the tapes, and I was thinking, these are the descendants of so many of these people who perished or who suffered through, survived. And part of what has happened, because Hani's a third generation, so was a young child. There are a lot of third generation kids and second generation who feel some of what went on, who read it, who are sensitive to it. And look, we're all products of so much. And at the same time, I was listening to these men who were singing in Yiddish, and the singer said, we have to look at this world and the trouble in it. It's a passageway for us. And that hit me. Not that I'm anywhere close to Haredi. That's not what I'm saying. But there was something, it's sort of a survival note that, okay, this is just a passageway. And we know how many people don't know that or don't believe that. But it's our struggle to go on in life and to balance. So you need a combination, and the American spirit and the way things are looked at always was very important to engage in, to feel. Because I was always told you have to do well in school, you have to be polite. My mother was so happy when she visited my dorm, Stern College dormitory in New York. And she said, the doorman told her, you have a very nice daughter. She's very nice and polite. And my mother said, I was so happy to hear that was the impression he had of you. And that touched me. So it's the combination that we have to have. And even my European, the background, I'm proud of it. And it does make for differences in all of us. So sometimes being different and combining with everyone is a good trait.
I see that all through your political life, and you mentioned it now, you were very faithful to your religious commitment. It was always something non-negotiable, even though it was a challenge. Moving to contemporary American culture, you were a supporter of the V-Chip, and you served on the board of the Parents Television and Media Council also. We live in times when the TV shows and the movies that have become mainstream present views that sometimes clash with a Torah world outlook. How do you think modern Orthodox Judaism should confront these challenges?
Well, in fact, I'm watching two of our kids who don't have TV in their homes, which, we would never do something like that. And yet, when you look at TV sometimes, or commercials even, it is a challenge. The computer, the internet is a challenge because kids can have access to anything they choose to have. And so parents have to close up what they should not be seeing, what they should not be touching. But you know what? At the same time, we are so surrounded by everything. And some people, and it works for them, enclose their communities. They don't want their children to learn from anyone that's not exactly like them. And they do it because they're afraid that they won't be able to overcome this. So I don't accept that attitude. I don't think it helps with education. At the same time, it is important for parents to take care, to be responsible and to not allow their children to go everywhere, and to also acknowledge that you don't always know where your children peaked in at what time. And and if you don't acknowledge that, you might be surprised someday also. So we do the best we can. And the problem is that our schools have to be likewise careful and helpful, because if we're not helpful, we can't take kids out so easily. And we don't know where someone's more helpful than another. I mean, the two boys I was talking about, one of them who became Lubavitch. That was the last thing on earth that I would ever think for this young man who had his cocktails Friday night, going out, whatever. But you don't know, just like you don't know about someone like that, you don't know about someone who is inside the circles. So we just have to make sure our children's friends are good, and make sure our big knessets are helpful, and our schools for our children are good. And we as parents have to show them.
I have so much more to ask you, but I want to give the chance to everybody else. So I'm going to go to my last question. Writing a memoir is a very daring act. You expose yourself to the readers. And that must have been very difficult because, as I said, you are a very private person. For example, it is the first time you have spoken publicly about your breast cancer. Was opening yourself up for a memoir difficult for you, or liberating, or maybe both? And I will add something else so that you can say, I would like to ask you about the work you did in order to write this memoir. You say in your book that writing it allowed you to gain perspective. It must have also given you new insights into your past and your presence. So I would like to ask you also, what changed in your own perception about your life by writing this book?
Well, that's a lot of questions.
Yes.
And I'll do them quickly because they have other ones on the floor out there.
Yes.
I think that let me start with your second. I gained perspective about my family, my background, my parents, when I indulged in exploration of everything and everything I knew they had gone through. I realized more than ever, I knew it before, how complicated their lives had been, how they managed they never looked at my brother and I in a normal way, in the sense that you had to do this, you had to do that, but nothing was. When I was playing with dolls with a neighbor in Gardner, Massachusetts, whose father was a truck driver, and I was going through the streets with my dolls, my father in Yiddish would say, "Ay, nourishes up," enough dolls. So I never, most American parents don't say that. He would say it's ridiculous, and that was it. And another time, this girl and I picked wildflowers across the street, and we went around and sold them for a few pennies. When my father heard that, he was outraged and told me, "You don't do that. You go back and give the money back to each person you sold those flowers to." So I had to go back and do that. Of course, my father, the immigrant, was not going to have his daughter allow her to go out and sell flowers to neighbors like he needed that money. It's a different mentality. So, and your first question I want to get to, give me one reminder clue.
Yes, it was if opening up about your life in topics
Yes, but
you've never written about was difficult, was liberating, or
Right.
maybe it was both.
it was both. It's difficult, how I handled breast cancer. I never did that. But then I thought to myself, I owe this because I never wanted to talk about it, but others have been infected by this illness. And I can't just not speak about it because maybe someone can feel a connection to some thought or some question I had. And I did it, and I spoke to Sharsheret last night, and I was so pleased to be able, to express myself on breast cancer. And really, the bottom line on that was that I set my medicinal efforts at 7 a.m. in the morning at Georgetown Hospital, which they did for me. And so Joey he brought me in. He sat there with his stuff while things were going off, and his office was and I just did my treatment with him. And so I had the few friends who knew, oh, I'll bring you. I said, thank you, but I'm fine. And so that really helped me. And also it was another realization of how I am so very, very lucky with my husband, who's, with this year alone. I looked at Joey, I said, you're my best friend. I'm very lucky. So, your life brings you more and more padding. And at the same time, you can ache inside for various things, but you become more padded with love and the caring of family and friends.
It's beautiful. Beautiful. I would like to open the floor for everybody because I don't want to have you only for myself. Let me see. Julie, you can change the view so that we can see the other people.
Can everyone see everyone now?
No, just you.
Oh, I took off the spotlights. Hold on.
Just be careful you don't lose me. I'll call back.
No.
Would someone like to ask a question from Hadassah? I have
Yes.
more. I have more questions, but I'm leaving you the floor so that you can all participate. Julie,
you can
yes.
unmute yourselves. I have a question if no one wants to jump in. So much of your identity is based on your immigrant experience. And as you know, Nishmat deals extensively with Ethiopian Israeli immigrants. And I want to know, what is your number one piece of advice? What insight would you share with our students if I could pass your message to them?
Well, first of all, let me commend Nishmat's efforts with the Ethiopian community. It is with some of the members who are really part of Nishmat. And what I can share, and as I said, my daughter Hani and one of her friends was Nishmat, and et cetera, et cetera. The important thing is not to give up what's unique and beautiful about yourself that comes from your background that's different. And to always respect your family, just like you were taught in Ethiopia. And just because you may be in a society now that doesn't take care of respecting the parents as much as in the old country, you still have to do it. And just incorporate and extend lessons that you feel are Ethiopian, whether it's children's lessons. People are interested whether it's recipes, all the ways that distinguish you from so many others while you're learning how to be more like everyone. So just be a strong Ethiopian Israeli. For the most part, that is where this community is now. And so proud of you, truly. Yes, another question? Uh-oh. Is no one there?
I don't know. Not,
Okay.
I would like you to tell us then about your relationship with Nishmat. What drew you close to Nishmat? And why did you send honey to Nishmat? And
Well,
what made you
right.
become a member of the board of governors?
Yes, well, Nishmat, Rabbanit Henkin, Nishmat has spoken for itself. It spoke to me as well. I am very, very proud of what Nishmat is able to accomplish. I'll never forget going to some function with Ethiopian women. And I was so proud that they had come out learning Nishmat, and it had helped change their identities and how they felt about themselves and how well integrated they became. So, and Hani, before Hani went to Nishmat, we had to take her around to some of the names she wanted to see of some of the other girls' schools. And we went from one to the other. And then we went to Nishmat. And after she'd seen everything, and I had my own ideas about a lot of things, but did not say anything. And she said, Mommy, Daddy, I want to go to Nishmat. And I was so happy because Nishmat has such grounding, such knowledge. It's really a very serious, strong women's yeshiva. It's very important. So that's how I was very pleased she went to Nishmat. And I love how Nishmat speaks, but it doesn't have to be just for this denomination or that denomination or this culture or that culture. They speak Am Yisrael together and women's knowledge growing and influencing the Jewish community. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else has a question? Rabbanit.
Hadassah and Ariela, I don't think this is a question, but I feel I need to say this. I've been spellbound for the last hour. It's really been remarkable to be welcomed into your memories of your parents, Hadassah, and looking around the room and who else is part of this. I'm thinking to myself of how our parents influenced us so profoundly and how each one of us, quite a number of us are children of survivors, but those like myself who are not a child of survivors, nevertheless, my parents were an immigrant generation. And I learned to read Hebrew when I was very young. I was a change of life baby. My mother had miscarried several times. She didn't expect to have a living child when she was 43 years old. And so I was a little bit of a toy in the home, and my brothers taught me to read Hebrew when I was 4, before I learned to read English. And my mother then said, I'm going to learn to read Hebrew because if my daughter can do it, I can do it. So I was listening to your words, Hadassah, and I was feeling so profoundly how that we have the responsibility of carrying on our parents' values and our parents' work, and how we've each taken responsibility. There are here, every woman who's part of this is a woman who stepped out of her comfort zone in order to take responsibility. And you've just made it so clear to us that that's what we need to do. And I'm so glad your words are taped, because your words are exactly what I want our Ethiopian students to hear. I noted down when you were saying the importance of not giving up what's special about your heritage and respect your parents. And I have to tell them tomorrow when I go to teach them that this is from an extraordinary woman who has lived a very rich life, who is, amongst other things, the wife of a vice presidential candidate in the United States, who's telling them, don't give up your heritage. So I want to thank you, Hadassah, and Ariela. The two of you are amazing.
Rabbanit, I just want to say, you are the most amazing woman. You are truly an example of how we have to copy you as much as we can, your strength. You are amazing. I'm spellbound by you.
I love
mean
you
that.
too, Hadassah. And
Yeah,
it's not has paid. I'm still here, and God willing, I'll be here
Thank
for
you.
quite a while.
Thank God.
So,
Thank God.
thank you. Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you when we can get back to Israel.
Amen.
Amen.
I want to give you all a little plug that you don't have to wait until you can get back to Israel, although we cannot wait to have you here in person. We look forward to possibly you joining us in our summer program, which is on Zoom this year, the first 2 weeks in July. And you can hear more from Rabbanit Hinken and all of our Nishmat scholars. We would love for you to join us. So please check out nishmat.net. Thank you all. It's been an incredible honor to have so many faces of Board of Governors members and of AFN board members. And I'm really delighted that we could share this together. Thank you all. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Bye, everyone. Bye. Thank you.